This is Lemmy with RevZilla. I'm here in Deadwood, South Dakota for the launch of the Moto Guzzi MGX-21 Flying Fortress. Now you guys may remember we covered this bike back in 2015 when it debuted at EICMA. I was pretty psyched about it then, and I'm still psyched about it now. I'm also really happy about the fact that Moto Guzzi is debuting this so close to Sturgis right before the rally. It shows their commitment to the American bagger market. Now we're here on this first look ride review of the MGX-21, and there's a couple things I want to find out. First, I want to learn if this bike can carve itself out a niche in the already saturated bagger market. The other thing I want to find out too is this motorcycle worth the price of admission? It's not an inexpensive bike at all. Now I'm going to find those things out on this first look review by getting out on the road and actually riding this motorcycle. While I'm suiting up, make sure that you guys click that subscribe button so you can check out all the awesome content we're rolling out at RevZilla.com, including bike reviews, parts reviews, as well as gear breakdowns, reporting back to you guys on what works and what doesn't. Let's hit the road.
Now this is a first look, so I don't want to get too bogged down in minutiae. There's some stuff I'm going to gloss over. For instance, the electronics. This thing's all kitted out with all sorts of electronic wizardry. We got traction control, multiple throttle modes, ABS, got all that stuff. But again, because we don't have long with this bike, I want to talk about what it's like to actually ride on top of the Flying Fortress. And I don't think you can even talk Moto Guzzi without talking about the engine. We got a Flying V in here, sort of the Moto Guzzi signature. And by Flying V, I mean this V-twin engine is actually mounted transverse to the frame. The crankshaft runs, in line with our direction of travel. Now this is definitely not the engine from your dad's dresser. It's not some lazy undersquare, slow revving 2-valve head. Instead, we got 4-valve heads on this thing, and this is actually an over-square motor. So the gearheads among us should realize you're probably gonna have to wring this thing out to get some power, and that's 100% true. Peak power actually rolls in here at 6,500 RPMs. You gotta flog this baby to get the power out of it, but there's definitely some there to be had. Keep that in mind. So one of the other things too that I think is also kind of important to talk about is the fact that this is not a huge engine. We're talking 1,380 cc's for those of you who speak Italian. For the rest of the folks in the dresser world, you should know this is about 84 cubic inches. Now when we look at the competition, check out say a Harley Street Glide, 103 cubic inches. If we're looking at say a Victory Cross Country, 106 inches. You got the Indian Chieftain at 111. This is spotting 30 or 40 cubes depending on what you're stacking it up against. I don't think it's that big a deal, but there are some people for whom the numbers game is kind of important. If that's you, the Goose might not be for you. Now going down the road, the Guzzi does fantastically, but where it really shines is in braking. This bike really does brake well. Up front, we've got a pair of stainless full floater rotors, squeezed by Brembo 4-pot calipers, painted red because red goes faster, stainless lines. We got a 2-pot squeezer out back. This thing just slows down quick, fast, and in a hurry. Makes it really easy to ride this bike aggressively. The only thing that marred my impression of the brakes, though, actually was not a braking item, it was a suspension item. The front feels a bit undersprung to me. Now, normally everything feels undersprung for me because I'm a pretty big guy, but at 275 pounds, I'm no heavier than a rider and a passenger who are both a little bit smaller. So if I feel like this is bouncy solo on the bike, another rider who's riding with a passenger may be thinking the same thing. So let's talk about the good stuff. The rear suspension I did actually like quite a bit. Remote preload adjuster, which is awesome, makes it easy to switch between solo and 2-up riding. The other thing that's really cool about that too is the fact they put the remote preload adjuster right underneath my right leg by the starter there. It's tricky, it tucks it in, it's not too obtrusive, but it's still easy to get to. The absolute best part of the suspension though for me, and really the best part of the bike I've saved for the absolute last part of this on-bike section, and that is the actual clearance when you're in a corner. This thing is awesome. Even with the suspension fully compressed, Guzzi's engineers tell me this thing has 37 degrees of cornering clearance. You can get this bike absolutely sideways, which I did here in the Black Hills of South Dakota. They have some 10-mile-an-hour hairpin turns, and I had this thing over on its side. It was awesome. If you're scraping parts on a Flying Fortress, it's because you're trying to be that guy. Makes it easy to really ride this bike aggressively and throw it through the turns. So the fact this has a very different mill, it has lots of cornering clearance, means that you have to ride this bike totally different than your average dresser. Let's pull over and talk about who's going to find the Moto Guzzi most useful.
So in spending some time on top of the MGX-21, I was able to both assess the bike and also ponder where this sort of fits into the general bagger scheme. Now, to assess the Flying Fortress correctly, we really have to consider some of its pros and cons. Let's start off with some of the pros. As you guys just saw, this thing's obviously a contender, especially in the braking and the cornering department. This brings a fresh performance flavor to the otherwise staid and fairly conservative bagger market. Another pro I want to throw into the mix here is one I rarely touch on, and that's going to be that of aesthetics. It's kind of funny, I don't normally touch on how a bike looks because it's so subjective. What I think might not be the same as what you think, and it might be totally different than what 10 other people think. So let me relate a story rather than give you my opinion on this. While we were shooting this in Sturgis, where you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a beautiful custom motorcycle, we had people constantly interrupting us during filming, and they all wanted to talk about two things. First, they wanted to know what this bike was, and second, they wanted to tell us how cool it looked. I don't think we got a single negative comment about this bike's looks, but we did have a bunch of people who wanted to tell us what a cool bike it was. That speaks volumes, regardless of how I feel or you feel about the styling of the motorcycle. Now, there are some cons that do come along with this bike too. As I mentioned, this is not a cheap motorcycle. It's right up there with the most expensive baggers you can put your money down for. The other thing too is that Moto Guzzi doesn't really have a very strong dealer network. There definitely are some more established players in the game, so if getting your bike serviced and worked on at the dealer is important, a Moto Guzzi might not be for you if you don't have a Moto Guzzi dealer nearby. Now, sort of related to that too is the aftermarket. The aftermarket's not particularly strong for Moto Guzzi simply because they don't make as many motorcycles as some of the more steadfast players in the game. Now, for those who like to keep their bike rock stock, that might be a non-issue. But if you're the type of person who's a tinkerer and you like to modify things, it might be more difficult with a Flying Fortress than it could be with something a little bit less esoteric. All things considered though, I think Moto Guzzi has done a really brave thing by bringing this thing out. This was probably not an easy decision for them to make, and I'm sure they have plenty riding on the MGX-21. And remember when we talked before about how this thing actually affected the market? Well, it's kind of interesting. I don't know that this is going to steal a whole bunch of market share from existing bagger customers. I really can't picture a bunch of guys on street glides running out to trade them in so they can get onto a Flying Fortress. Instead, I think Moto Guzzi is actually going to find success creating a niche for themselves of new bagger riders. I'm thinking specifically of two categories of folks. Firstly, there are the people who want a bike that's eye-catching, but they don't want to spend the time or money to modify a grandpa bike. For those people, something a little more, exotic, like the MGX-21, really fits the bill. The other group of people I think who are going to be swayed by this motorcycle are people who are maybe coming off a faster motorcycle, but instead they're realizing they want to bring someone along for the ride, or they want to go farther and maybe slow down just a little bit. The MGX-21 helps sort of split that difference there. You have plenty of carrying capacity on this, but you're not necessarily tottering along at a very low speed. Now, I had lots of other thoughts about the Flying Fortress, but you're gonna have to read them in my Common Tread article. Don't forget to subscribe to us too. I've got some waning sunlight right now, and I need to get this thing back to the folks in Italy. I'm Lemmy, I'm out of here.